Hello, and welcome to Cherry Bekaert's GovCon podcast, where we discuss current government contracting trends, compliance matters, and best practices to guide federal contractors forward. I'm Brendan Halloran, Director of Cherry Bekaert Advisory, and with me today is Jeff Annessa, Senior Manager in Cherry Bekaert's Government Contractor Services Group. As part of our continuing series on Contractor Business Systems, today we'll be talking about navigating business system audit and review findings, corrective actions, and the ACO determination process. Thanks for joining me today, Jeff.
Thanks, Brendan. Great to be here.
Yeah, great. So just in a little bit of recap, we've covered each of the six contractor business systems during our podcast series, leading right up to some of the best practices of how to kind of support an audit or a functional review of your system and some of the pointers that help those go a little bit more smoothly. And so really to kind of wrap that series up, we're going to cover audit findings or potential deficiencies that may be identified as part of the business systems and how you navigate the corrective action process, a little bit of background about kind of differences between deficiencies, and really what some of the ramifications of a potential significant deficiency with your system are. So this will really hopefully we want clients to pass their audits and functional reviews with flying colors, and hopefully there are no deficiencies. But with the amount of activity that we've been seeing, there certainly are plenty out there. And so just as a reminder, we've talked through these in quite a bit of detail, but there's two different agencies that are involved in this. And so DCAA, they conduct audits of the accounting, estimating, and MMAS system. DCMA does functional reviews of earned value management system, property, and purchasing. And folks are probably most familiar with that as part of a CPSR. And so, there are very defined processes for handling deficiencies with a contractor business system. DFARS, really spells out the obligations of the ACO and what they shall do. And, I think of any contractor's primary concern is really going to be that, a system disapproval, not only can it result in payment withholds to applicable contracts, but it also could preclude you from receiving awards. Probably the one that's most in the forefront there is accounting. It could preclude you from receiving, follow-on cost reimbursable contract type awards. So, yeah, it really does have a big impact. We've seen some, deficiencies that have led to disapproved systems, and it really, it can put quite a bit of pressure on the business, not only through cash flow, through payment withholds, but also through being awarded new contracts. So definitely a key area that we want to talk through in more detail. So, in the case of system audits that DCA conducts, what are some of the, indicators that, that audit may be coming up with findings or potential non-compliances during the course of the audit, Jeff? Is there anything they should be on the lookout for, or anything they can do about it?
Yeah, definitely. So I think this is one of the areas where communication is key. So DCAA historically isn't really the best about informing you of a significant system deficiency until they actually have their draft audit report ready. At that point, that's when they're ready to submit a copy of the draft audit report to the contractor for their review and response. And typically, they'll allow about 1 to 2 weeks for a contractor to provide a formal response to the issues that are outlined in the report. To be honest, though, if DCAA is coming up against a deadline, they might not be as generous with that turnaround time. Some of the other things that they do, there are certain circumstances that can apply. Typically DCAAs at some of the larger contractors, the business system audits can take up to 12 months, sometimes even longer. If there is a significant deficiency that they have identified, they do have a specific assignment that they can create to kind of spike that one out if it requires the immediate attention of an ACO while they continue towards completion of the system audit. So that's one specific area. The other, though, as I mentioned, communication being key. You can ask questions throughout the audit. I wouldn't be shy about asking DCAA. You might not be able to get a response until something has been through supervisory review and management approval. But at that point, I think the best thing to kind of bring home from this is that it's better to know about these things earlier rather than later. I know you talked about the withholds, Brendan, and possible system disapproval, which would kind of, bar you from obtaining any additional cost type contracts or bidding on anything. So I think it's very, very important to try to identify just kind of being, cognizant of what's going on during the audit. What is DCAA asking for? Are they really digging into different things to be able to try to identify that? And then just don't be afraid to ask them. I would always recommend keeping the ACO in the loop as well. You could even pull them into those discussions that you're going to have with the audit office during the audit, just to kind of get their take. I know an important thing to remember is, DCAA has their opinion and so does DCMA or any other ACO that you might have. So they might not always be in line. So it's good to kind of get everyone on the same page.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And Jeff, you've spent many years with DCAA. Did you ever see instances, during the course of one of these audits where, maybe audit was starting to, flag something as a potential issue, but where, working with a contractor, they were able to, either gather additional information or, perhaps understand a process differently, that it kind of resulted in it, being addressed and not really ending up as a deficiency?
Yeah, I think that actually happens pretty often. Part of the audit process, they'll go through a risk assessment. I know with the accounting system, they kind of send a questionnaire over and can be pretty robust. Sometimes, a contractor response could be anywhere from 80 to 100 pages. From there, they would kind of identify areas that appear might have deficiencies and ask for system walkthroughs, where the contractor would then walk DCAA through their process and how the controls apply. They would want to kind of see some demo or dummy transactions just to see how the system actually works throughout the process. From there, they actually do a narrative of their understanding, a memo of understanding that they then send back to the contractor for their input. I can tell you they don't always get it right the first time. So making sure that they have a clear understanding of how things are working. And, that's why I kind of try to say, always be in contact with them as well. If you feel that they're kind of going off on the wrong path, you can always point that out. I think always trying to steer them in the right lane is something you kind of need to be cognizant of in every audit, but especially in the systems audits. And it does happen pretty often, I would say, where you can kind of veer them, if they're going down the rabbit hole or going down the wrong path, to kind of steer them to, keeping things specific to the criteria and the audit steps that they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, it's a great point.
So one of the other things I wanted to touch on real quick too. So when DCAA issues their reports, a system report is going to have or be issued in the format called a SOCAR, which is an acronym that DCAA uses for Statement of Conditions and Recommendations. So what that does is it basically outlines the reports into two sections. Obviously, the condition and the recommendation. The condition actually has 4 different criteria or elements that DCAA should be commenting on, which would be the condition, which is the nature of the deficiency, the cause, which is just the root cause for the issue, the criteria, which is the legitimacy of the finding and really discloses how things should be, and then the effect, which could be what happened or what could happen as a result of the deficiency. And now when DCAA provides a recommendation, I will say they are typically pretty general. And I'll give kind of an oversimplified example. It could be something as simple as, recommend contractor XYZ develop a detailed policy and procedure for timekeeping to address the issues identified above. They really don't get into the specifics of exactly what you need to do to be compliant, given their independent nature and where they sit in the DoD, and the fact that, if there is a corrective action, they would go through and audit again. So they can't tell you how to do it and then go audit it. So that's more a discussion to have with the ACO to ensure you're complying.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they certainly know or audit knows what their expectation is, but sometimes
Right.
It's difficult to bridge that gap and actually put something in place that accomplishes it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Brendan, on systems that DCMA reviews, can you tell us a little bit about what that process looks like?
Yeah, so as we mentioned, it really is around purchasing EVMS and property. And so, there's obviously a functional review program that each of those follows, and those can be tailored to a certain degree, based on the nature of the contractor and the extent of their activity. Something like EVMS would be, very specific to looking at a particular contract, or in some cases more than one contract for for a compliance review or for surveillance. Purchasing is really going to look at all the procurement or subcontractor activity for, the contractor or contractor division. And then property, is frequently, where there is government furnished property. That can even be facility by facility. And, one of the things that, that I see as being a little bit different between, DCMA functional reviews and DCA audits is that, DCMA has, in the past couple of years, tried a couple of different ways to, one, identify, what they see as, non-compliance or deficiency with the system. And I'll use purchasing, I think, is a really good example, just because those happen pretty frequently. Is that, if during a CPSR there are findings, the procurement analyst, or team captain that's running that CPSR is enabled to issue level 2 cars to the contractor for those, very quickly, as they're wrapping up, the kind of the on-site and, in-depth portion of their field work. And so with that comes, that 30-day, requirement to respond to those. And with a CPSR, you're going to try and do that even more quickly. But what that does is, previously, all of those, findings or deficiencies would be actually called out in the report that goes to the ACO. And so this adds a step to the process before elevating it as a potential significant deficiency for ACO's consideration. At a level 2, the the functional specialist or procurement analyst is enabled to actually resolve those. So you can submit directly to the CPSR team. They'll review what you've done. Have you gotten to the right root cause for the issue? Is your corrective action adequate, and can you show that it has been implemented and done? And so they can actually resolve those before the report goes to the ACO. So that is a little bit different, that they've added that kind of checkpoint in there, and I think is certainly alleviated many things being elevated to like a level 3 car. I know that, with EVMS, they also can be doing some of that. Those reviews can span, a number of months. And so, you do have the ability to really kind of work corrective actions, before they, before they build up into something that might be considered significant. And then lastly, the other thing just to point out that, DCMA, and this was never or has not, at least to this point, been rolled out as an official policy. DCMA did, kind of roll out a limited program that, was really a pilot program on other, on all the systems that they review, to allow the contractor additional time to address, these deficiencies that were identified before they get moved to a level 3 status and kind of move towards a potential, disapproval determination. And so that was done at, some contractors. Again, the last that I heard on it was that it was a very, kind of selected or selective implementation of that. I think that has been beneficial and is, kind of allowed some systems to not, quite escalate to that, to that level of concern. So, DCMA, has put a few things in place that, I've seen leveraged pretty well. And so, certainly look for your opportunities. Don't wait for, for a final report to come out, as with, with DCA audits. Certainly be working, anything that you think might need, remediation or corrective action, be doing that concurrently with review as much as you can.
Yeah, I think those are great points, Brennan, and they really do kind of tie into, I think, the ultimate goal of no one, some auditors might want to, have the gotcha auditor, the one who always wants to find something. But I think the ultimate goal for the DoD and for government contractors here is to ensure that there is a compliant system that can be relied on, especially for cost type contracts, to be able to rely on the outputs that are coming out of the system to make management decisions.
Yeah, and it really does, point back to what you said earlier, Jeff, about communication, and sometimes that seems like a difficult thing to, try to have a lot of with the government, but really to, promote that as much as possible, because there are things that that a contractor could work during the process and get ahead of some of those issues, and so at least promoting, that culture of, communication, with the government, auditors or specialists is really, really critical. I was going to talk to just briefly, kind of what the ACO process and requirements are as a result of, a business system audit or review. And so, it's a very program timeline. And so, I know within DCMA, this is tracked very specifically from the issuance of an audit report or, functional report like a CPSR, is that, the ACO has 10 days to evaluate that and determine if any of the findings or deficiencies cited there are in fact, significant deficiencies. And so, it's a very short time frame that they have to evaluate that, and they would issue an initial determination in 10 days. If there are deficiencies noted, they would also include a draft level 3 CAR. And so again, the draft, it's not been issued, not formalized, and not signed off on, but it does give the contractor heads up that, things are progressing to a potentially, kind of severe junction. The contractor does have 30 days to respond to that initial determination, unless the contractor, vehemently disagrees with, the finding or deficiency. Typically, these responses include a corrective action plan, even though the ACO didn't, specifically request that. And so, as we've worked through with a number of clients, really that response should, show that you've gotten to the root cause of the issue. You may disagree that it's not material or significant, but you really do need to lay out and show evidence of why that is the case or what you've done to correct it. And so 30 days to not only get to the root cause of the issue and show that you've developed and implemented a corrective action is very short turnaround, which kind of leads back to why you should be working those as soon as you have any knowledge of them. And then the ACO has 30 days to respond to the contractor with their final determination. And so, that final determination will result in either, no deficiencies remain and the system is approved, or, significant deficiency or deficiencies remain and the system is disapproved. They will formalize that level 3 CAR. And that's when things move towards payment withhold to applicable contracts, and any other impacts that, a disapproved system may have. And so it's very, very, big deal, not only for the government, but contractors. And so you really want to be, put the resources that are needed to that. One thing I'm always interested in, I think we saw one recently in a in a follow-up audit report, Jeff, is just, what are some of the audit terms and levels of findings, is something that may be significant versus non-significant. And, I know that there's even a little bit of disconnect between what DCMA uses for terminology. And I'm always curious because, you really have to get to that in order to navigate this process at all.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to bring up, Brendan. And, with my years at DCAA, I can say this one comes up quite a bit from the DCAA side. And then, as you mentioned, I think we've had several clients that have had various questions on the differences in terminology. So DCMA uses the terminology that's found in DFARS, which only identifies a significant deficiency, which is a shortcoming in the system that materially affects the ability of the officials of the Department of Defense to rely upon information produced by the system that is needed for management purposes. So DCAA uses different terminology than that, And that's really because they follow GAGAS. And if anyone's not familiar with that acronym, it's the Generally Accepted Government Auditing Standards. Those are the professional auditing standards that DCAA follows. And within there, for these business system types of audits, there are specific identifiers for levels of deficiencies. And the three are a significant deficiency, a less severe significant deficiency, and a less than material noncompliance that warrants the attention of the contracting officer. So your significant deficiency is the same definition as what's in DFARS, what DCMA uses. Typically for a DCAA audit, that would warrant an adverse opinion that typically requires some corrective action and could result in system disapproval and withhold if that is upheld by the ACO. The less severe significant deficiency is usually the one that causes a lot of issues where people don't really know what it means because it says significant deficiency, but that's not really what they mean. Generally, this results in a qualified audit opinion, meaning that everything complies in all respects except for. And typically what that means is that it's a non-compliance that's material in nature, but it doesn't really rise to the level of a significant deficiency. So it's still something that DCAA is required to report on in writing, but they're stating that it does not rise to the level of a significant deficiency. So therefore, there should be no withholds or system disapproval, but would technically probably require some sort of corrective action. And then that less than material non-compliance that comes up is really just because GAGAS does charge DCAA with notifying the contracting officer in writing. It's not a material weakness. It's not a material non-compliance. And that it's really a judgment call by DCAA when they do include those ones. And those typically get included in a separate section in the report. So they're not really outlined in that SOCAR that we talked about earlier. And so one other thing you brought up is that, this can kind of lead to confusion between DCAA, DCMA, and the contractors. So, DCAA's terminology really doesn't help in the matter. I can tell you, this is why we stress the importance of communication with both DCAA and the ACO, just to make sure everyone is on the same page of what the actual level of significance for those findings are. In the end, contractors really should just show that the information coming out of their system can be relied upon. So that's really what we're looking for. And that's really kind of what designates the difference between a significant deficiency and not.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just with the differences in terminology, I know, just from what we've looked at, I mean, the not being completely consistent across, the involved agencies, definitely raises questions and I think a little bit of uncertainty about how, a particular ACO may interpret it and apply it. And so I think really, trying to understand that and again, kind of get ahead of, what's the real risk associated with it and materiality is critical.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how I think everyone should kind of approach the issue when that does come up, if there is any, unknown or uncertainty in what the actual level of the finding is.
Yeah.
So Brendan, being a former ACO or DACO, what are some of the tools that the ACO uses and how do they really work through the process?
Yeah, and it's a good question, and I think probably varies a little bit based on the auditor or the functional specialist involved in the contractor and their willingness to really be active in the process. But the ACO really needs to develop that that relationship at the onset of the audit and be involved because just waiting for for an audit report or business system report to come out it's just too late to really know the depth of some of the issues. And so really being involved throughout the process and part of exits and some of the ongoing activity is important. Understanding what the significance is. An ACO needs to determine ultimately that there is a impact and risk to the government of a particular finding. And so, they really do need to have good understanding of that. And so, again, the research and understanding of not just in writing, but what does this practice really do is critical. And I think certainly utilizing their warrant authorities, they ultimately make that determination of what is significant or not, and ultimately if a system is approved or disapproved. So a contracting officer really needs to certainly understand the impact of that and in some cases push back if something is not material, or or needs further review. So it's certainly a matter of kind of experience and willingness to really get into the details. The other thing too is that ACO really needs to know that they can rely on DCA if there needs to be follow-up verification to show that a corrective action was done, or the functional specialist to know that the contractor really got to the root of the matter, and going forward that is going to be information they can rely on. So knowing what resources are available and utilizing them are probably some of the key aspects of of really trying to navigate that process. Just one follow-up question, Jeff, and I know that we could spend lots of time kind of working working through all of the
Oh yeah.
potential avenues that these can go through, but just in your experience with with DCA doing some of the follow-up on corrective actions, and kind of reporting back to the ACO that that something is implemented, how does that work? Any issues or concerns to point out to contractors on that?
Yeah, so DCAA can actually review corrective actions. One, I'm sure everyone knows, if requested by the ACO, but they can also perform scheduled business system follow-ups. And typically those are in coordination with the ACO. Everyone's on the same page to determine the results of the corrective actions that might have been put in place. One of the big things to know is that DCAA likes to allow for sufficient time for contractors to put those corrective actions in place, just to determine if they've actually made an impact. Ballparking it, that's usually around 6 months, but it can definitely be sooner if the contractor can show that there's sufficient transactions available to adequately test the effectiveness of the corrective actions. Another thing to point out is that the scope of any type of business system follow-up or review of the corrective actions should absolutely be tailored just to those specific areas. So DCA shouldn't be coming in and performing another full-up audit. They really should tailor the audit program that they have to be specific to those areas where there were previously reported deficiencies. And I think one of the things we always like to remind everybody, and we've probably touched on it a couple of times in this podcast here, is that contractors should really begin corrective actions as early as possible, especially for those significant deficiencies. We recommend implementing corrective actions prior to any DCAA audit report issuance, since system deficiencies can result in a disapproved system or that possible withhold. And honestly, being proactive like that is typically viewed upon pretty favorably by the ACO and DCAA, showing that willingness to, to set things right or really understand the root cause of the issue.
Yeah, I don't think we can stress that enough, that, that's, once you get into that process, there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of requirements that, audit and the ACO have to meet. And so the more that a contractor can do to facilitate that review and understanding is certainly a major resource impact, and will take the attention of a lot of folks to help manage it. But it really is I think the only way to get through the process successfully and deal with any potential findings. So yeah, it really, there's many different nuances with it, but certainly something that we enjoy getting into the details of. So, but I think we'll wrap up. We've covered quite a bit of territory in terms of what contractors can expect, and some of the things that they should be on the lookout for, as well as kind of initial actions they should take. So Jeff, thanks very much for the conversation and input. It was really great. And everyone who's listening, thanks for joining us. If you have any questions, feel free to email Jeff at jeffrey.annessa@cbh.com, or myself at brendan.halloran@cbh.com. And please join us again for our next podcast.
Thanks, everyone.